Hello and welcome to today's webinar here at the Corporate Research Forum. Delighted you could join us. For those of you who've been with us before, you know we enjoy audience participation and you'll have an opportunity to participate in some polls, but also please do give us your questions as we discuss the topic here in the studio. So today's theme is harnessing the HR tech revolution. And this is a theme that we've returned to a couple of times over the last couple of years. And I'm delighted that here in the studio with me, I have Rami Pakila, who's the Head of HR Digitalisation and AI at Nokia, and Ian Bailey, who's Managing Director of My HR Future Academy. Didn't say that correctly. Nigel's been with us before. Nigel is our Director of Research at Goldsmiths and has been doing a lot of research in this area. So you work with us on resourcing and other things, so we'll pick up on that as well. And of course, Gillian's with us, who is CRF's Research Director. Now, what we're going to be looking at today is, as I said, we've picked up HR technology before, but we're particularly interested this time round in terms of what are the opportunities and the pitfalls that we're seeing of HR actually utilising. So there's a lot of hype in the marketplace. We know that there are vendors out there who are pushing this as the future and where we need to go. And we know at CRF that historically HR, we're all a bit susceptible to a fad or a fashion. And so what we really want to dive into here is of those trends, of the things that we're seeing happening in the marketplace, what's really happening in practice. And so I'm delighted that the studio in here today, we're actually going to talk about some examples of what's worked and what's not worked. But what we wanted to so Gillian, obviously, we've just concluded the research. And many of you who are CRF members participated in that research. But what we wanted to check out for those of you on this webinar was what's your view in terms of the technology that you're using. And so the question we'd like you to respond to is, in your organisation, where are you currently making the most investment? So where's the greatest investment in HR systems and technology happening today? And we've given you a few choices there for you to have a look at. Maybe it's none of the above. So while you're thinking about that poll, we'll dive in and we'll start with Gillian. And just to hear from you, Gillian, really in terms of, we've looked at this topic before, we've come back to it. What are we noticing this time round?
Yeah, so I think there were 6 key themes really around what's changing and what's emerging from an HR technology perspective. First one is, and this is a trend that has been going for some time and I suspect will continue, is moving from own software on the premises to software in the cloud. And I think the next theme that sort of connects with that is what we're seeing is more and more that it's really in the gift of the software vendors how HR processes work more and more. So the way that we do things is less something that we can customise within our organisations and is more something that's kind of dictated by the systems that we use. I think the third theme that was really emerging is around this move to mobile. So work is shifting out of a fixed workplace, and our HR systems have to adapt to that. Number 4, not surprisingly, was analytics everywhere, embedded in the systems that we use, as well as a real focus on workforce analytics. And you know that as a topic, as CRF, we've looked in depth at workforce analytics. There's also, I think, an expectation that the quality of the user experience will match what employees are experiencing in their private life. So whether that's shopping on e-commerce or the sort of systems, home entertainment systems, etc. Exactly. Yeah. So the workplace experience should be consistent with that sort of consumer grade experience that they have. And then I think that the final theme, and I know we'll be touching on this through the conversation, is artificial intelligence. Now, there's a lot of hype about that. Just
and
how much,
stories.
Yes, and horrendous scare stories. We've just been talking about facial recognition before we started on this webinar. So, this is clearly going to be something that is going to be a big push for the future. But I think, for me, a real important point to emphasise is that those are, I think what we picked up is the themes in terms of what's changing, but there's a perennial question that we need to keep in mind, And this is something that is really a point that we push consistently in our research at CRF. But whatever you choose to do about HR technology, it's ultimately got to flow from the business and the people strategy. So very easy to get caught up in the hype cycle of what's going on at the moment, but you really have to focus on, what are our key business priorities and how does the technology enable us to answer those business issues rather than being, allowing yourself to be seduced by the various technology options that are out there.
Well, and that's an even bigger risk if, picking up on what you were saying first, actually we've got some vendors who in a sense are shaping the marketplace and we're being attracted into that as opposed to starting with the strategy and the business need. Okay, we'll dive into that in a second. Let's just see if we've got the poll response is available yet. So it's saying that, this is interesting. So you're saying over half of you that actually you're still investing in your core system, either a new system or upgrading that. And so we'll come back to that. I think we'll pick that up. In second place was technology solutions for talent acquisition or talent management. And Nigel probably has something to say of that. Picking up on what you were saying, third place then workforce analytics, but then quite a long way behind technology enabling the employee experience and learning systems. So that's quite interesting because these are the areas that we're seeing the innovation in the marketplace. And so we're hoping to cover all of these on this webinar. But we wanted to start actually with employee experience. So it's interesting that, Rami, for you, this is the area that Nokia you've been experimenting with and working with, and yet our listeners out on this webinar, perhaps this is an area that they haven't had so much experience about. Yeah. So really interesting to hear from you, you've started this journey and what your experience has been and what some of the benefits and challenges are.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that, just to comment on the poll a bit, is that, we have the same of course, we have always the underlying core system that we invest into. But if I want to have three concrete examples where we are using AI today. So first, we wanted to create a HR chatbot for all our employees, so that they could access HR information anytime, anywhere. So we have done
picking up the mobile
the mobile, and we have just introduced a mobile one. As we fully support that idea that I even today, if I have a question, if I need to check any timeline or whatever, I go with my mobile and have a chat with the chatbot. So that's the clearly number one that we wanted to do. So we want to move all these basic repetitive tasks to the digital assistants.
I was going to say, can you give us some examples of the sorts of things that your employees might ask the chatbot, just to give the listeners a sense of that?
Yeah, so the idea, actually, we have two. So we have two versions of the chatbot. One is global, that is available for all employees, all of the 100,000 employees. So there you could ask about generic questions about performance management, or actually, great example what is that last week we launched a share in success plan, so voluntary share purchase plan. So that's all the information, how do I enroll, how do I opt out, what's the contribution and so forth, all those details are there.
Practical how-to, here's a new policy, how do I then go about and access that? Okay.
That's one aspect. The second aspect is a local one, that if I need to know what's the car policy in Finland, or how do I reimburse spectacle lenses or something like that, that's really a local topic. So we have local versions as well. And then, we are rolling out that to more countries. So that's the idea. The one thing that, we have found in Finland, which is really important as well, is that on this when you roll out this chatbot, that, if the chatbot is not able to answer, then you have a real HR to help. So we really have put the effort to handle the basic stuff on the FAQs, on the chatbots, and then have HRs being present on and available by call or face-to-face.
So people's fear that automation and AI are actually going to mean they get less access to a human being.
Yes.
The way you've designed it is almost the opposite.
Yeah.
Let's take the basic responses away from our human HR people, and that frees up their time that then managers and HR people can work better together because they're not doing that transactional stuff.
So when you go to the, even on the elevator to the and then you have screens. So we have screens that, please use the the chatbot. And please come to meet, and HR is on Thursday available on this room.
So there's a bit of a marketing campaign
both,
around that. Okay.
Yeah, so then they what should I use now?
Okay.
So that's that, So I don't know if the audience is interested. I think that when there's so much hype about AI, so that what are we really when we talk about AI? So what do we really mean about that? So, in chatbot areas, that, the idea is, we are using kind of different text analytics, and we use also kind of that, in chatbot, it's really about that, we try to kind of train the chatbot so that, the chatbot is able to answer the questions without being explicitly being programmed for. So that's really kind of the piece
so
that,
the machine learning,
the machine learning piece of it. So that's one. The second area that we're focusing a lot and use the AI or machine learning a bit to help us is on analytics. So concretely on the analytics side, we use different text analytics. So one good example would be that, now we have got, launched the Sharing Success program. Now we could say that, let's say that, after the 2 weeks, we could see that, what were the questions all about? What did people really ask about? So we could do a text analytics all the way that, what were the questions? We could pick up the kind of the main point of the sentence and have that presented. So you get kind of much more real-time view what's going on in the organization.
So you think prior to rolling something out,
yes,
these might be the questions, and essentially what this is allowing you to do in real time is then to go in a week later, 2 weeks later and say, we thought the questions were going to this, but actually what people we haven't been clear about is this, which allows you a second opportunity to clarify. And
even globally, it's kind of that, if you think about that, it's really hard for HR to understand, if you ask any global HR leader, say that, what are the most kind of common topics around the globe for the past month? It would be a very hard, difficult question to have. I can check it from my mobile, real time, online. That what's the kind of the organization pulse, what they're really asking for.
Great. Okay, and that gives you then some insight when you're speaking with the leadership of the organization about where the temperature of the organization is relative to some of the people practices.
And we are kind of a bit of experimenting on the sentiment analytics, so that you could do a sentiment analysis. Is it a positive or negative, and how positive or negative is that?
How are people feeling about this?
But it's kind of really an early stages, I would say.
Okay.
Maybe,
great.
And the third is, which is supporting then, is more kind of learning kind of this resourcing area. So we are trying to kind of figure it out. How could you improve the intake of candidates? Could you do kind of some pre-screening or not? And then I think there was a discussion prior to we started on the onboarding. I see a big, I agree that there's a big opportunity on the onboarding. How we get when people are joining, how you could easily onboard the people faster. So that's going to be 30.
Great, that's really helpful, Rami. And we'll come back to the onboarding one. I want to stick with the employee experience. Any of you who are listening into the webinar, if you've got any questions at any point for any of our panelists here in the studios, please do pop them in. They'll get pushed through to me here, and then I can put your questions to the panelists. But thank you. Nigel, I mean, you've been doing work in this area. I mean, listening to Rami talk about, the example of where they've rolled out, in particular in the employee experience and the chatbots. What's been your experience with other organisations in terms of what some of the challenges are? What are some of the building blocks that need to be in place?
Sure. So listening to Rami's story at Nokia, I think what he did and they did really well is they knew they had a clear idea of why they were doing this, to be able to be more responsive to employees and get an aggregated picture at the organizational level of the types of questions that are being asked. So I think that you really need to, because the landscape is so cluttered, might be a word I would use, you really need to know what it is you're trying to do and why it is you're trying to do it. And I think you want to develop a shared understanding of that amongst technical people and executives in your organization, so that there is a really clear understanding of what we're in for. How much work is it going to require? What are the realistic timelines? And you want to clarify with the vendors, assuming you're working with vendors, what it is that you're buying that's experimental and what it is that you're buying that actually works out of the box like a MacBook Pro. So if you can understand those dimensions, you'll be in a better position to implement these technologies effectively.
If you don't clarify that, you may think that you're buying something that's already been road tested in effect, and actually you're one of the beta sites.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're learning as you go. I'm just interested because given that the investment that we're seeing in the, from the poll here is that 50% of organisations are still investing in their core systems, how important is it in terms of before you jump in and you're using chatbots and you're doing the AI stuff, how important is it that you have got a good sort of foundation to build on? Rami.
So I think in certain areas you could kind of maybe divide it in two parts. in some of the areas, like the chatbots or something, it's not that fundamental. So we can do and we can go and experiment and really kind of advance. For some other parts, like in people analytics, it's really fundamental. You cannot do anything without kind of having a core underlying data. And it's not necessarily only about HR data, having all that HR data available, but it's also kind of the enterprise data, kind of combining with finance data or other kind of real estate data. So that's really fundamental. So for us, it's going to be kind of like many companies are coming through mergers and acquisitions, that you need to consolidate, have one place of the data. So we call
that becomes a priority in a merger situation.
Yes.
More than it would have been historically. You're
Yes.
saying.
Yeah.
How do we get to one data set quickly?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's some. And I'm thinking back to what you're saying there, Nudge, in terms of being really clear on the why. What is it that this is going to give you if you're going to make this investment, and also being clear the amount of effort and work that it might be to actually get to it, rather than necessarily believing the hype.
I think that's right. So you want a clear understanding of what the requirements are and whose responsibility delivering on each of those requirements are, and a kind of a blueprint or a roadmap to success with some of these technologies. Because one thing's certain, they can be implemented well, and when they're implemented well, they work really effectively. But they can take some work, and you do need the right skills, and you do need to pick the partners carefully to make sure that happens.
Good. Well, we've got a couple of questions that have come in, not surprisingly, on this. So Caroline and Kirsty, thank you for your questions. And it's around, how are you managing to influence your business to invest in HR IT as opposed to customer or business IT? You've mentioned, Rami, that you need both. So what are some of the and this is to all three of you, in terms of what are you noticing in terms of the business case? What's some of the better arguments that you've heard?
So for us, it was kind of we had a kind of, in the beginning, we had a very clear idea that what's the business problem. Our business problem was we get 400,000 questions per annum for HR globally. So 400,000. So it's kind of you can create a kind of fairly good kind of idea. Even if it's experimenting, we don't know all the facts. And
so you can put a cost to that, can't you? You need a human being to answer 400,000 questions.
Yeah. But of course, it's also kind of that I think that our HR leadership and HR director is kind of that are seeing the kind of tremendous value that improving the employee experience, of course. But there's a kind of clear business case, and so I think that HR is willing to put their own money on the table if it wouldn't come from, so to speak, from IT side. But I think IT see this as important, and I think we have a solid, we have a clear view what we want to do, and we have a kind of a, I would say fairly solid business case to do it as well.
Ian, I know that this is an area you're having conversations with businesses all the time. What are you noticing they're asking for, and how do you help them understand what this is about?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to, we've talked about it already, it's business value, and it is all about the business problem. So I think too much we have a risk in HR that we kind of look inwards and we get stuck in our silo. Certainly to what Gillian was saying about the shiny new object kind of syndrome as well. And I think we have to stay focused on what's really going to add value to the business themselves. So I spent some time working at Cisco, and while I was there, one of the big projects we did around HRIT was all around skills. And that had a massive true case with the business, which was, how do we transform an organization from hardware to software? What are the skills we need for the future? Where the
skills are going to be fundamentally different.
And so when you tie it to what the business is actually trying to do, then it's not an HR project. It's a business problem that you're solving, and there's HR technology that will support that, which is really work technology. And I think the more we can kind of get out of our own silo and think about how we truly enable the business to be effective and add business value, then a lot of those conversations, they don't go away entirely, but they get a lot easier because you're talking about the stuff the business cares about.
So there's also something about the language we're using then, so that in the way that we talk about these things, it's how we're solving business problems with it as it being an HR project. Gillian, what are we seeing in the research?
And so I think one of the trends that we're starting to see is we had a massive wave of outsourcing a few years ago, and what we're seeing an emergence of is some of this technology can actually enable organisations to bring certain things back in-house at a lower cost, but also potentially at a higher quality. So I think one of the complaints around outsourcing is, it's much harder to keep a grip on the quality of service.
It's a bit of a black box. It becomes a bit opaque, doesn't it?
Exactly. So, many organisations we're speaking to are recognising that they might be getting value for money, but it's at the cost of lower quality, whereas they actually want to have greater control over that, and it plays back into the employee experience as well. So bringing that in-house, finding different ways of delivering those services that are higher quality as well, it can also be part of the business case.
And I'm just thinking about this experience of people being on the go and accessing it all of the time, and in a sense, all of you are talking about the employee experience. But generationally, we've got a generation coming into the workplace, and picking up on your point from the research, Gillian, we have an experience in our day-to-day life as consumers that we want replicated in the workplace. Any of you got any experience in terms of the generational differences in organisations and how you're overcoming those, or you've seen organisations work with those?
Yeah, so I try to avoid the generational piece because there's been a lot of research that kind of questions it. But it's more about that we're all very digital now. And we can talk about certain generations being more digitally native. But generally speaking, and it is a big generalization, when you think about how we exist in our consumer lives, digital is just everywhere, right? Yeah. Every single thing we do, whether it's the smartphone, Netflix, Amazon, whatever it is. And you come to work and it's just different. The experience you have is completely different. Work technology has not caught up. We're still talking about moving to the cloud, which is terrifying because we've been talking about it for 10 years, and yet I think it was a Sierra Cedar survey recently said like 40% of companies are still, operating some form of on-premise technology. And so when you think about it in that way, there's this massive shift or this massive disconnect, and we need a massive shift between what we experience in our consumer lives and what we experience at work. And that, to me, is the biggest thing.
That's the disconnect.
It's not the age thing or the generation thing.
Okay,
it is the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you feel then that maybe when you get the digital natives coming in, that's only ever been their experience? They live in the digital world, and so if they come into a workplace that feels like it's in the dark ages,
then they're less accepting.
The disconnect is going to be bigger than for others,
yes.
or
yeah,
less
absolutely.
acceptable. I wonder.
Yeah, I just think they're less accepting of it. They don't even understand. Whereas, if you are older and you've had to deal with that tech for longer, then maybe you're more kind of understanding of that. That disconnect.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So that has some implications for our ability to manage expectations in the business and what we can and can't roll out over what time frame.
Yeah, and I think it also impacts on the employer brand. I mean, we did a big piece of research last year looking at the whole field of talent acquisition, and a number of companies were heavily investing in things like AI-driven video interviewing, gamification, and some of those sort of virtual selection technologies. And part of the case for doing that was because they wanted to portray an image to potential new talent, particularly younger graduates and so on, that we are on top of the latest technology, and that is part of our offer, and it enhances our employer brand to be to show that we are engaging with and deploying all these new technologies as well. So it plays to that as well.
Right. Okay. Well, let's. That's helpful just to understand that sort of employee experience, particularly because our listeners, that's not an area that it looks like many of them are investing in. What I want to understand, again, for those of you on the webinar listening in, is we've touched on the business case briefly there through one of the questions from Caroline Shearer, but I'm interested in understanding what other barriers you're experiencing. So we're going to go to our second poll, which is which barrier to realising the benefits of new HR technology do you most struggle with in your organisations? And again, we've given you some options. But I'd like to sort of move the conversation on while you're doing that poll here in the studio. So one of the challenges, Rami, we heard you say that one of the reasons Nokia has made this investment is because it helps shift what your HR teams actually do and how they spend their time. And I know, Ian, this is an area that you've been looking at a lot, which is, what does this mean for the capabilities of us as HR professionals and practitioners, and the whole learning space generally? What are you noticing there?
Yeah, so in terms of HR itself, we're seeing this massive shift now to become more data-driven and more digital. And those are capabilities that traditionally we haven't seen so much in HR. And I think that is a huge reskilling that needs to happen. It's around people analytics, it's around digital HR and HR tech and being able to navigate that market. It's around workforce planning and really how do we use data more to kind of inform that and think more about how we can plan in a much more agile fashion. And then there's skills like design thinking, which are now becoming far more important as well. If we're looking at deploying technology, we need to think about the user. We need to think about how we get adoption. It's not as simple as just rolling something out and hoping everybody uses it. Coming back to the consumer thing, that's not how it works, right? If you hate an app, you delete it and you go find another one within like 8 seconds. And so how do we think more about actually the technology that we design and build with the employees and the workers and the managers and how we deploy that? So that's that kind of design thinking piece. And then I think with those kind of more technical skills, we also need to build or continue to build on skills like consulting and influencing and stakeholder management as well. Those are skills we've had in HR before, but they're becoming even more important now if you want to drive this type of change through, if you want to make the business case and get buy-in for your projects, then those are really important as well. And so what we're seeing in HR is a need for reskilling, which is no different to what we're seeing in every single organization, in every single part of the workforce. And so HR needs to understand how it can upskill, but it also needs to help an organization that it supports do that. And I think technology plays a part there as well around helping with continuous learning. And that learning technology piece is shifting dramatically to support that across the broader environment as well.
Just picking up on that then, so we've just had a question in from John Wallace who's asking, picking up on the point that Gillian made about consumer experience. So I mean, we're talking here about HR capability and what this is doing for building HR, but what community within your organisation do you feel is benefiting most from this? Is it the line manager? Is it HR? You know, where are you seeing sort of the best return on investment in your experience, particularly from the learning side of things?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the skills of the HR kind of upskilling, or in terms of technology, or both, do you think? Like kind of,
yes, okay. I think either.
Yeah, so I think, you know, typically as well, as kind of budgets have become more constrained, HR has focused more and more on leadership and managers, and those have become the primary stakeholders. I think, you know, as we've heard from Rami, what the shift in HR tech is helping us with is now really improving the employee's experience as well, and how HR can support the employee, and we can scale stuff much more easily than we could before, right? You don't have to get people into a room for a workshop. You can maybe deliver training online, you know, to everybody in the company.
That's potentially a benefit for all employees.
It is, and so I think it goes across.
Point of view.
Yeah, I think we've pushed a lot out, employee self-service, manager self-service, and now actually we're seeing this opportunity to deliver more back with the same resources we have, or potentially by, you know, saving money, and we see that across the employees, managers, everybody.
Yeah. And Rami, from your point of view, obviously your HR colleagues have been at the sort of forefront of this. What feedback have you been getting from them about how they're experiencing, what it's meaning for them as HR professionals?
Yeah. It's a very good question, because when I first started the whole journey, that I was scared about, what do HR people when I come from a kind of technological angle as well. But I'm being really surprised about that, how willing the HR people are about, reskilling them and how they can, adapt the new kind of technologies and so forth. And I think that, when we started the whole journey, we thought that it needs to be kind of course there's technical aspects, but it needs to be really focusing on the employee experience, needs to be easy to use for HR people as well. But I've been really, I'd say positively surprised how fast HR people are able to reskill. And we have kind of created kind of these, I would say, onboarding modules and training modules that people can easily take, and we can, train people so we can scale it as well. So fundamentally, it needs to be, scalable as well. Of course, at the same time, I see that that some people are, it's really hard to get, let go some of the old services. That
they like that part of their job. Yes.
Yeah, it's the same service. This is how it has been, running for some days already, some years and so forth. So it's really hard to, let it. And of course, because we don't know if the new technology will be kind of successful and so forth. But you need to give it the opportunity, to go. So, but overall, I would see that it's more positive than I thought, and people are able to reskill them fast. I'm really proud of the team.
And I remember, Gillian, I think it was last year, we had a conversation about learning in particular, and one of our panellists was from Sky, and she was saying they hadn't had to change any of their team. Yeah. They'd moved to an agile way of working, and everybody within the team had been able to adapt and learn themselves, and it was an opportunity to grow their skills, and it sounds like it's a similar experience for yourself.
Yeah, there's maybe some of the areas that I fully support on the reskilling. Absolutely, you can do that. But there are some parts that you need to get some skills outside as well. There's that
so partnering with
partnering, of course, and then maybe kind of getting kind of new recruitment in specific areas. Especially I would say on analytics side. Certain kind of when you do kind of certain analytics kind of I would say kind of if you would utilize let's say Microsoft Power BI reports or data modeling, there you need some more kind of maybe I would say skills
technical
outside.
Skills,
more slightly more technical. It's faster. It's faster to do it. It's more kind of cost. It's better to do it.
And I think the other angle to that is also around vendor management. So there's managing internal expectations, but there's also those commercial relationships with outside parties. So it's not just technical skills. It's also, how do we set expectations well with those
interesting.
external parties?
I mean, I've just got the results of the poll up, and it's the second highest one, and 24%. Technology over promises and under delivers. So just picking up on what you're saying, there's something about also managing expectations of that. I mean, the highest one, which is interesting given the previous poll, is that dealing with legacy systems or poor data is the thing that people are finding. So a third of those of you who are listening in are saying actually our core system, our core data is not fit for purpose yet. And that's a significant barrier to us moving forward. But that interesting one of technology over promising and under delivery is how do you work effectively internally and externally to manage expectations?
I think that's really difficult skill, and to have it that how do you manage all these multiple vendors? It's not going to be one vendor that you deal with. It's going to be multiple vendors that you need to deal with. You need to be clear on what do you want, so that you are at the driver's seat. You need to have your vision and then connect it to the business case, like you said in the beginning. What's the business case and how to support it. So, and that's really hard.
Yes, yeah. I'd like to move the conversation on again to one of the other areas, which is around decision making, and it's data driven, because we've kind of touched on this. So some of your employees, Rami, are able to sort of go and find information for themselves, but then they've got the person available if it's a more complex. And we touched on earlier that one of the areas where most work's been done is sort of in resourcing and onboarding. So I'd like us to sort of move a bit more into that area. And from your point of view, Nigel, the work you've been doing, I think there's been some concerns or questions, I suppose, about if we're using machines or we're using analytics to drive decision making, particularly recruitment decision making, what are the challenges about validity and reliability of that as a process?
Sure. So when you're evaluating the effectiveness of these AI systems in that talent management space, you can separate out the decisions you're evaluating into ones that are relatively objective and easy to evaluate. Was the question kind of answered by the chatbot? Did it get a high net promoter score or not? That if you do it well, that's relatively straightforward. Other kind of things where we're trying to measure underlying psychological attributes about people, their potential, their abilities, their capabilities, that can be a little more challenging. And when you do that, you have to be aware that it's really easy to build a bad platform that looks like a good one. And when you're building these platforms, you need to work out whether the numbers that you're seeing about the individual candidates actually correspond to their real abilities, skills, and knowledge. And that's where the tricky part of the process comes in. And what we're really looking to see there is that the system is first of all reliable. So if I'm profiling Ian today, and then I, based on his kind of social media or his game performance, and I did it like a month from now and nothing had changed about Ian, he needs to get the same score.
Right.
And we also, and that's not as easy as it sounds, but you need the evidence. Then the second part is whatever that score is that we give Ian needs to correspond to some kind of future performance in the organization. We call that the validity. We call that validation. Is it measuring something meaningful?
So we wanted somebody to do this. Have we selected the right person? Are they able to perform in the job effectively?
That's a good way of describing it. And then the other elephant in the room is this idea of this concern over bias. And bias is certainly something we should be very concerned about. But media underplays our preparedness to deal with these bias challenges. We've actually been dealing with bias for a long time as industrial psychologists for the last half a century. We've got methodologies. What's new now is the scale and the speed at which the decisions are being made, and it's amplifying any bias that's in the system. So we just have to be very thoughtful about
So what you're saying
we...
is bias is always there. We have processes, if we do things well, to notice the bias, pick up on the bias and take action. The risk is that if we're using machine learning and analytics, that more people are implicated before we notice that there's a consequence.
Yeah, that's right.
It's
It's certainly not the case that we've solved every problem related to it. That would be like, you know, that would be a little misleading of me to say that. But we do have good approaches in the psychological sciences space and amongst the machine learners. And when we bring those together, we have thoughtful solutions that we can implement.
So in a way, that's good news for HR practitioners, in that what we're saying is, this is because we hear these fear stories, don't we? This is going to replace jobs, you're going to be out of work. But actually what I'm thinking, if I'm hearing you right, is you're saying actually the core processes of how we go about doing recruitment, onboarding, learning still apply. The fact that we've got a machine tool to support us and help us with that doesn't take away from the original design skill and the ability to design the process in a way that delivers what you need. So
Yeah,
really it's
minimises
a both
the
and.
bias. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just wanted to pick up, because I'm curious, Rami, on your point of this. So what you're also saying is, to use this sort of technology, it works best when we've got almost an either or. So we're asking for a yes/no answer, or there's data, or there's information that, you know, I have a question, there's an answer to that question,
Yeah, the way
the machine can give it to me. Is that
the way I describe it is that these AI systems are great for getting information that's objectively verifiable by a third party.
Right.
You know, did Karen run this webinar? Was Ian in the room? Did Rami come over from Finland? Great.
Yes.
Do you know, but how is Karen feeling right now in this interview? It's not.
Yes.
It's not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
the technology's
So we
not
need to
there
be
yet.
careful about the hype. So I'm curious, Rami, from your point of view, then, you know, users are now getting, you know, answers to their questions and decisions from a machine, in effect.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, what's the feedback been about that? How are they responding to that? So there's a sort of an emotional element to it, isn't there?
Yeah, that's true. So, but maybe kind of, I would say that, you know, when you know any employee is getting a service, you know, I could, you know, use my mobile, you know, get the basic information fast, immediately when I need it. It's really nice. People really like it. That, you know, I don't need to go and I don't need to go to the intranet try to find it.
So it's matching their experience as a consumer, picking up
exactly
on what we were talking about
So
earlier.
having a WhatsApp, you know, discussion, or I can have a WhatsApp kind of like discussion with the bot. So that kind of works extremely perfect. Then of course people are that, you know, they have a very clear idea that, you know, this is not a chatbot topic. This is something I need to have in an HR.
Okay.
So please give me an option to an HR. Then if you say that, you know, you need to go through create a ticket, wait 48 hours, then, you know, the frustration goes up, you know, significantly. So there's more expectation that, you know, yeah, I can get the chatbot, that's fine, but it doesn't work for me. Please give me an HR. So that's really important.
So there's almost then, if an employee has a mismatch between what they believe they can get from the chatbot versus what they want from the HR, and you've said, no, actually, that's an answer we want you to go and get from the chatbot.
Yeah.
That's still the area of tension.
Yeah,
okay.
that's true. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So what I wanted to sort of move on to is, you know, were there any other areas? I mean, we've tried to cover the broad suite of things, and in the sort of the last 5 minutes or so, just wanted to check, were there any other areas from the research in this that we were picking up in this field, Gillian, before we move on to sort of some practical tips from the panellists?
Well, I think that the data from the poll was very interesting, you know, in terms of the priorities for our audience. And one thing that really strikes me in thinking about HR technology is I talk to a lot of HR professionals and, you know, so what's going on in your business? And the response I get is we're doing HR transformation.
Right.
And, you know, when you sort of probe further, what that really means is often it means we're implementing one of the big systems, and you know we've managed to keep the vendors' names out of this conversation so far, but you know who we're talking about. the thing that slightly concerns me about that, and it's back to your point, Ian, about really being focused on the business priorities and solving real business issues, is we have to be very careful not to get distracted from the business, what's going on in the business, how do we as a function, kind of better enable that. So it's also reflected in, when we look at analytics as a topic, many of the examples were around, for example, being able to predict employee turnover. So, we're getting more and more accurate around, we know that there's an 80% chance of this profile of person resigning within the next 6 to 12
where there's
months.
a flight risk of
exactly,
talent.
and perhaps that's very useful information to know. But the question that sits behind that is, well, is that really the biggest business issue? And in some
Does it
organisations,
matter that
yes, it
they're
is.
leaving?
Yes. And so it's really that the start point needs to be what are the key business issues that we're going to solve with this, and and I do think there is the ability to put together a strong and valid business case, but you really have to start from that perspective of what business problem are we going to solve, and how does it improve our performance.
Great. Thank you. So I'm sure our listeners are really keen, or often when we're on these webinars, we have great jobs, they're sitting there and they've got to make a decision about what do they do next. And from your experience, are there any practical recommendations or insights that you think from what you've learned for the different projects you've been working on that you would share with our listeners in terms of what things they should be thinking about? Rami, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember kind of it was 2018 January when we had the kind of HRLT meeting. I went to kind of pitch the idea of chatbots and some of the analytics. And it's really about when you create a kind of concrete demonstration that you build some kind of proof of concept kind of idea and showcase what that is.
So it's linking to the design thinking
yeah,
that you were
and
talking
absolutely,
about, Ian.
I fully support the design thinking idea. So you come with a concrete idea. So even if it's it was a kind of mock-up, but we created a kind of experience, how the experience could look like. We had a vision. It was sold. So I could immediately get the funding. I was at a kind of immediate decision point that, yes, we want to do this one.
So you've articulated the problem very clearly, but then you've also been able to showcase what a potential solution and selling it as an experiment. Let's try this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And it also kind of, when you do kind of this kind of experiment of kind of some kind of concept, you learn that if you iterate it before you go to this LT, it's not kind of slideware. So you built and no, it doesn't really work in this way. So you kind of you are actually better.
So it's not
prepared. Yeah. Then coming back on the solving kind of real business problems, so I think for us it was kind of it was clear on this 400,000 questions per year. That's clear business case, but also it's really important to think about what are the kind of other areas that are kind of main requirements for you. For us, it was that we wanted that HR is able to maintain and update the content by themselves. There's no coding involved, so that I get truly the ownership within HR. And that was really core one of requirement for us. So you need to be very clear on this one before you start going out. And something, of course, what we have been doing for the kind of maybe past 1.5 years, we've been, going step by step, building at the proof of concept, then going with the one country, second country, seeing the scaling options and so forth. So that's been something that, it's really go step by step. And maybe on the business case, because there was one question about that one. For some of these areas, you are able to find it and justify it, but you need to be really having areas for that. It's harder to justify. I can't justify. On the people analytics side, I can justify, but you still fundamentally believe that you should invest.
And I just want to answer, because we've had a couple. Kirsty's asked the question about whether you've built a system internally or partnered, and we're not naming suppliers, but I just want to clarify you've partnered with an external provider, haven't you, to do this?
Yes.
Great. Last couple of minutes. Nigel, what would be your top tip for our listeners?
I would speak to the lines of business, speak to the people in the business and ask them what the problems they have are that more effective employees would solve, and build the business case around that. And use that to get funding. And once you get the funding, implement a minimum viable product and iterate quickly.
Great, thank you. Ian,
So
what about
building on both what Nigel and Rami said, I think this opportunity to do a pilot, test and learn, kind of prototype, proof of concept, all those types of concepts are really important to understand what works, what doesn't, and not just trying to deploy a massive scale project. And then, yeah, absolutely user at the center and listening, you know, understanding how you can do more continuous listening, getting feedback from managers, employees, and making sure you're feeding that back in to iterate.
Great, thank you. Well, we're in the last 20 seconds of this webinar, so I just want to say thank you to the contributors here in the room, and thank you to all of you who've been listening and for your questions. That's been really helpful. And you can stay online and continue to chat with each other beyond this. And also, any of your colleagues who were unable to listen to this, we will be making available on the podcast. So thank you.